Everything would have been fine if they just had a Brita filter. Hello and welcome to Rotted Review of the Day, and today I am reviewing the made in 2019, released in 2020 movie, Color Out of Space. Now, if you recognize the map behind me, then you probably can guess that I have been waiting for this with a high fever of anticipation. We, in my opinion, have not really had much success in getting Lovecraft adaptations put to screen in a quality manner. We've had a lot of movies lately that have been inspired by Lovecraft, inspired by cosmic horror like The Endless and The Void, but as far as a straight adaptation of his works, there's really not a whole lot out there of any real quality. I'm not a big fan of Dagon. As far as like the black and white, The Color Out of Space, and the black and white, The Call of Cthulhu, I liked, and I don't want to detract from the quality of them, but I do think of them more as a tip of the hat to Lovecraft more than a standalone horror movie. But as far as just taking a piece of his work and adapting it to a feature-length motion picture that conveys the cosmic dread and the mental breaks and the physical harm and all the weird elements that make up a Lovecraft story, I really don't think that we have had a quality motion picture put to screen yet. Until now. I am pleased to report that I really did love this movie, and as a Lovecraft fan, I thought that it was actually a very serviceable adaptation of his work. So this movie principally follows the Gardner family, a mother, father, teenage son, teenage daughter, and a younger son, and on a surface level, they live a fairly normal life. They have moved away from the big city and are now raising alpacas on a small farm in the New England area. And something peculiar happens one night as they're living their normal lives when a meteor crashes in their front lawn. And it's unlike anything anybody has ever seen. There's this flash of this insanely bright magenta color that is very off in a very peculiar fashion. And this meteor seems to affect everybody in its own unique, individual, and off-putting kind of way. For instance, Nicolas Cage, playing the father of Nathan, he smells something in the air. He can't escape it. He goes into the house. It's still there. He can't describe it, and it's just really off-putting to him. Nobody else seems to smell anything. And other people start to exhibit peculiar individual traits as the movie continues on. But the main notion of this is, at that point, once the meteor lands, everything starts going wrong. And a lot of this is observed by Ward Phillips, who is played by Elliot Knight, who is a hydrologist. He's a scientist that's out there checking the water tables for the plans to build some infrastructure in the future. So he gets to see a lot of this, and as things emerge as far as how this meteor is affecting everybody, especially in terms of drinking water, he kind of becomes more prevalent in trying to help out. And that's really about all I care to say about the plot itself. I think that this is a very unique roller coaster ride that should be experienced fairly fresh. Now, one element of this movie that I was dreading after watching the trailer is something that I think a lot of people are going to be wanting to watch in this one, or at the very least questioning whether it's prevalent in this, and that's Nicolas Cage. The one thing that I took away after watching the trailer was that there's had the high probability of having a completely wackadoo Nicolas Cage. And it's not something that I wanted. I'm going to be perfectly honest. I think that there's a time and there's a place, and I enjoy it as much as the next person. I think that there were definitely shades of Mandy in the performance that were kind of alluded to in the trailer to this movie. And the one thing that I really wanted out of this movie was to have a good Lovecraft film. I didn't want a wacky Nicolas Cage movie. And that's something that I feared after watching the trailer. So let's take Mandy, for example, and I'm probably going to wind up dividing some people or winding up in a controversial opinion camp or whatever, but let's take Mandy and just say that for the fans of it, the rabid fans that are constantly talking about Mandy. Now, definitely not all of them, and I would even wager to say not the majority of them, but I would say it's definitely in the double digits on a percentage-wise, where if you were to ask them what the overarching plot line was, what the emotional impact of the visual styling was, what the subtext was, so on and so forth. If you were to ask them the fine-grained details of what they loved about the movie, it might draw a blank. What they loved about this movie was Nicolas Cage making this face. and completely chewing up every single scene and every single moment once he made that transition into completely wacky Nicolas Cage mode. Which, again, there is a time and a place, and I enjoy it as much as the next person, but I think that that is one of the things that defines Mandy. That when you think of Mandy, you think of Nicolas Cage making this face. And the one thing that I didn't want was to have one of the most recent real attempts at having a Lovecraft adaptation basically be thought of as nothing but this. So, I am pleased to announce, after having watched the film, that doesn't really happen. If you're wondering if, after watching the trailer, if Nicolas Cage is in his Mandy mode, I would say no. He does deliver a wacky performance. He does go a bit Nicolas Cage in this movie. But I would say no more so than any other character, and definitely no more so than the plot and the storyline called for. So there are elements of it if you're looking for just that when you walk into the theater. And that's another thing, is I think that by having this come on the heels of Mandy and having that element in the trailer, I think you're going to get people coming into the theater looking specifically for that. And if that's the case, if that's all you're looking for, you might be a little bit disappointed. It's there. It's just not there to the point that I think you might be hoping for. So keep that in mind. And honestly, I couldn't be happier about it, that it did tone that down. But again, it was in line with the other characters. And I think that that's something that this movie pulled off extraordinarily well, that I think is extraordinarily difficult. I really appreciate the character element of this movie, because we had, for the most part, our protagonists were not necessarily the Ward Phillips character of the hydrologist, but I think it was the teenage son and the teenage daughter of Benny and Lavinia, played by Brendan Meyer and Madeline Arthur, respectively, that were our protagonists. They were the ones that we were kind of witnessing these changes through, these changes in the environment and the changes in the characters. And they're slow and they're subtle. And that's one thing that I loved about this movie, was that the changes were very, very small at first. They were just, every character was perceiving something a little bit different, and they were behaving a little bit different. And considering this happened pretty fast, we did not have a very solid measure of normal for them. But we had enough that when they started showing their characteristic tics and traits that showed the change with the characters, that we were able to pick up on them. And they were a bit terrifying. Just that one little thing where they might have used a swear word that they wouldn't have used before. But having the characters as our protagonists that are also going through these changes, that are also being influenced by the environment and by whatever's going on around them, while also staying grounded enough that we're not just going down the rabbit hole and into Wonderland, that we as the audience are able to see the changes and see the weirdness and see the, pick up on it, that we're not just completely off the rails on an acid trip. I think that that's a terribly difficult and important balance that this movie managed to really nail, and that's one of the things I did love about it. But as time is distorting and as characters are fighting and so on and so forth, we as the audience, because they are experiencing it also, like I said, they stay grounded, but also as they experience it, as they go through these changes too, it does make the audience feel what they're feeling. It does provide us with that sense of disorientation, and hats off to that as well. I think it's about time that I go ahead and throw up all the scores. As always, 4 different categories, each one worth up to 25 points for a total possible score of 100 points. And I thought that this was an exceptional movie through and through, and I think the scores show that. This had a very, very high risk of having over-the-top Nicolas Cage. It pulled back, it didn't go there. It had a very, very high risk of being style over substance. It pulled back, it didn't go there. It had a lot of Nicolas Cage, it had a lot of style, but it didn't cross that line. It kept the balance well. And what we wound up getting was a terrifying, dread-filled, very unique, very interesting, H.P. Lovecraft adaptation put to film. And it's one of the first examples I can think of where it captures that mental break. It captures that environmental cosmic horror influencing everything around it. And it captures also the physical nightmares. Some of the practical effects in this and the creature design was just astounding in terms of what they were able to put to screen there. I really felt like I was watching for the first time a movie that had done a Lovecraft story justice. And on that note, I could not recommend this movie more. If you're not an H.P. Lovecraft fan, I don't know how you're going to perceive this one. I don't know how much you're going to like it. But as a Lovecraft fan, I can say that I loved this movie. And on that note, absolutely must watch. And so that's my review of 2019/2020's Color Out of Space. I really thank you for joining me here today. I look forward to seeing you tomorrow. If you like this video, please click like and subscribe. And if you want to support me further, my Patreon and my merchandise storefront links are below. Remember, next time you want to watch a horror movie, first make sure that it's good and rotted.